Well, good morning, guys. Was that fun or what? Let's give those young people a round of applause. Guys, those are not the future of the church. They are the church. And it is so good to have them lead us this weekend. Hey, welcome Highlands folks. Let's give the Highlands folks a round of applause. We're all together, big family reunion this weekend. We're going to be here together for the next 2 weekends, and then in 3 weekends, we're going to be at the Capitol Theater in downtown Wheeling, which is going to be an amazing weekend. Hopefully nothing goes wrong. We'll see. Lots of grace, right? We are in a series called I Love My Church because we love our church and because it's August and because every August we kind of circle up around the vision of what God has given us to do as a church and to get ready for what is coming. And last week I shared that we know that people are coming to church and we know when they're coming to church, right? Next month. They're going to come in September because that's what happens. And so it's important that we're ready for them. And I encouraged you last week to do for someone else what someone has done for you. That there were people who were volunteering, there were people who were preparing, there were people who were praying, people who were hanging out with kids, people who were welcoming, all of that when you came, so that when you came, you would have this amazing experience and then you could hang out with Jesus and Jesus's people for a while. And now you're here and it's your church and you love your church and now it's time to turn around and do for someone else what someone has done for you, because most of us came because someone invited us. We know that. The first week we talked about the fact that the church is not a building. It is not an organization. It's not even a leader. It's not me. The church is the people of God, all of us together, living in the presence of God on a mission from God to push back darkness and to change our community and our world one life at a time. And that Jesus kind of cast this vision of Jesus' disciples expected Jesus to come into Jerusalem. You know, the week that we call Passion Week, where he comes into Jerusalem and he's eventually crucified. They expected him to come into Jerusalem, kind of take the mask off, his power unleashed to kick the Romans out, and his kingdom established throughout the world. And Jesus said, no. That's not how it's going to happen. It's going to happen kind of like a mustard seed grows into a mustard tree. And that mustard tree ends up changing the environment. It creates shade and different animals come and different things grow underneath. It changes the environment that it grows, but it grows slowly. And it grows from 1 cell to 2 cells and from 2 cells to 4 cells. And it just kind of spreads that way. And that's how his kingdom, he said, was going to grow and spread. And he said it was kind of like yeast. You put yeast into a batch of flour, and it's just a little bit of yeast, but it spreads and it multiplies and it grows. And then you end up with Panera Bread, and it's wonderful, right? And Jesus said that is how his kingdom is going to unfold, right? And it has been for 2,000 years, and it has impacted and changed our world, but he's not done yet. Jesus is not done. And we look around at the world around us and we're like, oh, it's all terrible. And there's a lot of bad stuff going on, but don't worry, Jesus isn't done building his kingdom yet. So we're going to get there. And guys, we are the rescue plan. You, if you're a follower of Jesus, are the rescue plan. We talked about that last week a bit. Now, this week, what I want to talk about is doing for others what others have probably done for you, but in a different category. Last week, we talked about serving and getting on the team and being a part of the team and preparing for the folks who are coming. And if you haven't signed up for one of our volunteer orientations yet, we're going to do 2 more next weekend. They'll happen during the services, so you can come at the 9:30 service, and then you can attend the 11:15 service next weekend, or vice versa, whatever works for you. But if you've not signed up for a volunteer orientation, I want you to sign up on your Connect card for one of those 2 next weekend and plan on being here, because that's one way we can do for other people what others have done for us. And it's one way that you can be a part of making a difference in our community. And it's a significant part. Lives are being changed. But this week, I want to talk about doing for others what others have done for us. And what I mean by it this week is not 90% of us, and I'm just completely making up this number, but I'm gonna make it up and be confident about it so you won't know the difference, all right? 90% of us are here because somebody invited us to church. I mean, and we do Connect cards every week, and we ask first-time guests how you heard about the church. The data backs that up. Nationally, the research done in church world, the data backs that up. We're here because somebody invited us, most of us. And so what I want to ask you to do is be a part of helping spreading the word, of growing the mustard tree, of helping other people find and follow God. And as Jesus said, it's a person-to-person thing. Like there's a part for every one of us to play. Now, when I say the word evangelism, there's a portion of us who just broke out in a cold sweat. And you're like, all right, let's breathe together, right? In through the nose, out through the mouth, cleansing breath. You guys ready? It's gonna be okay. Really, you're gonna be all right. Now, most of us are just uncomfortable with the idea of evangelism. And you're fine with, like St. Francis of Assisi. He's like your hero, you know. He's the guy that said, preach the gospel constantly, use words only when necessary, right? You're good with that. I can live out my faith, and that's great, and that's preaching the gospel, but don't ask me to use words. And most of us, I would say most of us are uncomfortable with using words. Now, there's probably 2 to 5% of us who have the gift of evangelism. You're the person who gets on the plane and the person sits down next to you, and within 5 minutes you're talking about Jesus, and like you get off the plane and they've had a complete conversion experience and given their life to the Lord, and they plug into a church, and you got that gift. And so you look at the rest of us and you judge us. Why don't you do this? Stop judging me. I'm just saying, stop judging me, because most of us don't have that gift. That's called gift projection, and it's not healthy because there's other people judging you because you don't have their gift. But that's another sermon for another time. Don't do that. Where was I? 95%. Yeah. So most of us are not comfortable with that idea. We're not. Now, that doesn't let us off the hook. The Apostle Paul, in writing to Timothy, said, do the work of evangelism. It's work. Like if you're a follower of Jesus, over time, one of the things you need to learn to do is share your story and share Jesus' story. But that's not what I'm going to talk about this morning, so you're good. But over time, you need to learn how to do that. Peter, writing to the church, said this: always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope you have. In other words, live out your faith. Do the St. Francis of Assisi thing. Live out your faith. Right? And when people ask, why are, you've got that diagnosis, but you seem to have total peace, or you're going through this tough thing and things are good with your soul, or you chose to do the right thing and it ended up costing you. Why'd you do that? Whatever it is, as we live our faith out, people are going to ask questions, and they're going to, why do you have hope when everybody else is despairing? And when they ask those questions, you have to be ready to give an answer for the hope that you've found. Does that make sense? All of us need to be preparing for that, but most of us are not ready for that at this point in time. Now, I love how Peter ends this verse. He says, but do it with gentleness and respect. If you're going to share the hope that you found, do it with, in other words, don't be a jerk. I'm going to just put it in modern vernacular. Don't be a jerk. Don't be pushy. Don't be trying to argue with people. Do it with gentleness and respect, and share your story and share Jesus' story. And that's good. And we'll talk about that in some other sermon on some other day. But the reality is most of us aren't there right now. Sound reasonable? Sound true? I think it is. Heck, most of us aren't even inviting people to church. And that's a whole lot easier, right? Dr. Tom Rainier did a study a few years ago and ended up writing a book from it called The Unchurched Next Door. This is what he said. This is what he discovered. Only 2% of church members invite an unchurched person to church. Only 2%. 98% of churchgoers never extend an invitation in a given year. Now, boy, it's quiet in here. It's kind of awkward. If that's true, I think it is, and it might be a little bit higher here, but I'm telling you, it's not much higher. Oh my gosh, that doesn't bum me out. That just shows me the potential that is laying within this congregation. I mean, what we could do if we could turn that number upside down is staggering. But we have to get to the place where we are inviting people to come. Last week, I laid out how many people come to faith, and it's like overwhelmingly an invitation. Yeah, people check it out online. People will, see a billboard or radio ad or whatever else. And all that does is create familiarity so that when you invite them, they're like, oh, yeah, I've heard of that. And it gives them another exposure and another nudge towards church. But it's the invitation that makes a difference. At the beginning of the summer, we had made the decision to move to the capital, and that we were going to do that in September, 3 weeks away. It's coming fast. And so one of the things we identified real quickly was that we would run out of children's space at the Capitol before we ran out of adult space. And so we determined we have to secure space that we can grow into with the children. So completely under the radar. I mean, nobody knew who was doing it. We had an alias kind of do the contract and all that. Not an alien, an alias. And because we didn't want anybody to know what was going on, because we didn't want the price to go up or all that stuff. So we go in on a Friday and close on the Kaufman building, and they're like, oh, it's you. And so we bought it, but we didn't have time to put together a big announcement or anything. So we went through that weekend. We said, we'll just do the announcement the following weekend. We went through that weekend. I left for vacation on Monday, right? And so I get to the beach on Monday, and I get a phone call going, both television stations and the newspaper have run stories that the Vineyard has bought the Kaufman building in downtown Wheeling. I'm like, oh, crud. Because here's the deal. You guys are hearing about the fact that we bought the Kaufman building from the news instead of hearing about it from us, and that's just not good. That's not the way information's supposed to. But who would have known that somebody buying a building in downtown Wheeling would spark an investigation? Literally, I went to the courthouse and tried to figure out who bought it. And then they ran stories and had zero information, just that the Vineyard had bought the building. So you got to love that. Love our local news media. They're great. So, anyway, I sent out an email to you guys. If you were around then, you know that. We sent out an email and explained what was going on, put it on our website. But as I ended up calling and talking to the different media outlets, and I was talking to the person at the newspaper, and she, very quickly, as I explained what was going on, that we were moving to the Capitol, that we needed more seats so we could reach more people, and we just needed more seats. We were out of space, and so she stopped me, and she suddenly became less interested in the Kaufman building and more interested in how is it that you're growing when most churches are shrinking or going out of business or closing their doors? What are you doing? And I said, well, that's pretty easy. I said, within a 10-mile radius of our church, there's 114,000 people. 13 to 14,000 of them go to church somewhere. And there's 70 churches that are competing for those 14,000 people. There's 100,000 people that don't go to church anywhere. And there are very few churches that are going after them. And I said, our whole strategy is to create a place that they'll love to come to where they can hang out with Jesus and that their lives can be changed and they can meet God and have their sins forgiven and start a new life. I said, we just got a bigger market. That's all. You got 70 churches competing for 14,000 people and just a handful of churches who are going after that 100,000 people. It's just a bigger group. We have a bigger fishing pool. And we just happen to believe that church is, when Jesus said, go be fishers of men, that he didn't mean just swap fish from aquarium to aquarium, that we were supposed to actually go out and reach people who are bona fide, unchurched people. And so what we do here every weekend is we try and create a church that unchurched people love coming to. All right? And this is what I explained to her. One of our staff goals is to create a church that unchurched people enjoy and love coming to. And in doing so, we feel like we're joining with Jesus in what he did. Jesus hung out with the irreligious people. He came to seek and save the lost. He hung out and he spent time with and he went after people who had grown lukewarm in their faith, who had bailed on religion and walked away. And that's where he spent most of his time. Now, and what I explained to her as well is, look, we don't water down the message to do that. We preach the Bible and we worship passionately and authentically. We just do it in a way that if you walk in here and you've never been in church in your life, you can still go, I connect with that. I get that. That's helpful. That's probably true. And you can understand it. We put the cookies on the lower shelf so everybody can access. We just explain things, right? And we create a down-to-earth atmosphere. We dress casual. Sometimes the pastor doesn't even wear shoes. Sometimes it's just Chuck Taylors, but but yeah, it's down to earth. The music style connects with the culture, contemporary design, friendly people, which is not something that we have to work real hard at because that's just who you guys are, but it creates a friendly environment, awesome kids environment, and it's deeply spiritual. People want God. People are not opposed to God, and they're not opposed to even the power of his presence in their life. So what we do is we create an environment where the Spirit of God can move and does move on people, but without being spooky. You know what I mean? You know, like because look, if we get spooky, here's what's going to happen. You're not going to invite anybody because you never know what's going to happen at church. And it's your reputation on the line, right? And so it's deeply spiritual without being spooky. Now, the question, of course, comes back, then why do you go to all this trouble? Why do you go to all this trouble? And the answer is because we're on a mission from God. We're on a mission with God to reach the people that Jesus was trying to reach. And because people matter to God, they matter to us. All right. Sorry, I kind of get excited. You know, as you look at the Bible, there are different types of evangelism. There's proclamational evangelism, where somebody stands up and explains the gospel, and maybe in a public setting, maybe in a setting like this. In the Bible, we see this. We see Peter do this in Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 4, where he proclaims that Jesus came and died for the forgiveness of sins, and that we need to repent and be baptized and all that. And Acts chapter 2, 3,000 people come to faith that day. And this is a very biblical model, right? But 98% of people, I'm probably just making this up. It's somewhere between 95 and 98%. I shouldn't tell you. I just need to be confident, right? But are scared to death of public speaking, let alone talking about that, right? It's one of the greatest fears that people have. Most of us aren't going to do that. If I were to tell you, I want you to go out on the streets of Wheeling and proclaim the gospel and lead 2 people to Christ this week, there wouldn't be anybody here next week. You guys are like, I'm gone. And I'd have the 2% of you who are like, yeah! And we just have a good time together, the 2% of us. Anyway, and then you just start to judge me because everybody else would be gone. Anyway, so there's proclamational evangelism, and it's good and it's biblical, and yeah, but it's not accessible to most of us. Then there's what we see what I call servant evangelism or service evangelism. And we see this throughout the early church, where they served one another, where they met one another's needs. We see this throughout the early church, even beyond the Bible years. The Roman Empire went from being a pagan empire to a Christian empire in a very short period of time, a couple hundred years. And one of the primary things that was attributed to that shift was the way the Christians served the people around them. I mean, they would go into cities that were riddled with the plague when everybody else was leaving and had means to leave. They would go in and they would take care of the sick and the dying and bury the dead and would just, they just served people. They took care of the poor. They loved their communities in the name of Jesus, and that's powerful. And most of us are really okay with that. Well, you're good with that because you don't have to use words, right? Eventually, you're going to have to use words because you have to give an account for the hope that you have. But anyway, you're good with that, and that's powerful, and we should all be living that way. Absolutely. I hope you are, and we're going to talk more about that in the weeks ahead. The third type of evangelism that we see in the Bible is what I call come and see evangelism. Now, come and see evangelism is where you just say, come and see, right? Jesus did come and see evangelism. The disciples did come and see evangelism. And it is unbelievably biblical. And guys, this is something you can do. You might not be doing it at this point, but this is something you can do. In John chapter 1 and verse 39, let me set this up real quick. Jesus comes on the scene. John the Baptist is the big, religious superstar of his day. He's got disciples who are following him. Jesus comes on the scene, walks by, and John goes, "Hey, there's the guy I was telling you about. He's the one that was to come." And so a couple of John's disciples walk away from John, run up to Jesus, hadn't even thought about what they were going to say, and we know that because of what they asked Jesus. They kind of run up to him, and Jesus turns around. I just picture the scene. Jesus turns around to him and goes, "Yeah?" And they're like, where are you staying? Because who asked that question when you got Jesus in front of you? But that's what they asked. And this is what Jesus says in verse 39. He says, "Come," he replied, "and you will." Come and you will see. And then it goes on. So they went and saw where he was staying. And they spent that day with him. So they spent the day with Jesus. And it was about 4 p.m. So here's what we know happens. They become convinced after spending some time with Jesus that Jesus was the answer to their questions. That Jesus was the one who was supposed to come. And that's what happens when you spend some time with Jesus. Most people just never get to spend time with Jesus. But if you spend some authentic time with him, he is the most compelling person who has ever lived. He is the most, people, when they get to know Jesus, love Jesus. And we know that they become convinced that Philip, convinced that Jesus is who he says he was, goes and finds Nathanael in verse 45 and told him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law and about whom the prophets also wrote." He's convinced after spending some time with Jesus. Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Now, Nathanael's a little bit skeptical. He says, "Nazareth? Can anything good come from there?" Now, Philip could have gotten in an argument with him and said, "Well, this is good and that's good and you should believe for this reason." But what does Philip say? Is it still on the screen? Put it back on the screen. What does he say? Let's say that together. Come and see. So Nathanael goes and hangs out with Jesus. And he becomes convinced that Jesus was the answer to his questions. And again, when we invite people to come hang out with Jesus and they spend some time with Jesus, man, it's compelling. It changes things. People end up following Jesus. Not everybody. Okay, I just want to be clear about that. But lots of people. And that's exactly, guys, what we do here every weekend. We create a come and see environment where people can come as they are. They can feel comfortable as they are. Where we present the message in a way that if you're a Christian, there's something there to grow your faith. And at the same time, if you've never been in church in your life, you're like, that's helpful. And that probably would be helpful to come back next week. And what they get to do is spend time with Jesus in his presence, because God comes among us in a special way when 2 or 3 are gathered in his name. He's always with us, but there's something that happens when we gather together like that. And I hear that over and over again. And they get to spend time with us. One of the most compelling things about Christianity is the power of community together and people loving one another and loving others well. And they discover that the church is different than they ever thought it could be. And they discover friends, and if they stick around, purpose and salvation. And as they spend time, their lives are transformed. You see, come and see evangelism. And the others are important too. I'm not saying they're not, but come and see evangelism paired with a compelling weekend service where people can come and see. It's safe for them. Maybe the most effective form of evangelism that we have in our day and age. It's not the only, but it may be the most effective. But here's the deal. I do know it's the most empowering, because for the 95 to 98% of us who are uncomfortable, you can do this. You can do this. You can turn to your neighbor. No. My wife tells me I should never have you turn to your neighbor and say anything, right? Because 58% of you are uncomfortable with that. And yes, I did make that up. Turn to your neighbor and say, you can do this. All right, you can do this. But, and this is a sermon with a big but Only 2% of us are inviting people. Wow. Again, if I asked you to go out and stand on the street corner and proclaim the gospel, there'd be 3 of us here next weekend. Right? You just wouldn't do it, or you would pretend you did it and come back and you'd be a liar, and then I'd have to preach a sermon online. But anyway, but most of us can say, come and see, right? Can you say, come and see? Yeah, I think you can. Absolutely. And guys, it's effective. According to Dr. Rainier in that same study that he did, 82% of the unchurched are at least somewhat likely to attend church if invited. 82%, right? That's phenomenal. Now, they might not come the first time. In fact, the research shows that it's between 6 and 7 invitations before somebody says yes. So you might just be number 3. That's okay. Keep inviting. Keep inviting. But what if those numbers were flipped? I mean, can you imagine if we went from 2% inviting to 98% inviting and 82% are likely to say yes? We're talking about a move of God of biblical proportions. We are talking about not just numeric growth, we're talking about exponential growth. We are talking about having an impact on our city that could literally change the culture of our community and our region. And all it takes is us being willing to say, come and see. Yeah. It is unbelievably powerful, the potential that is sitting right here in this room right now. Now, I'm not saying this necessarily easy. I mean, and that's not easy for me. You know, we're afraid, what if they say no? Well, they might, or they might say yes and then not show up. That happens a bunch too. But eventually, if they run into 6 or 7 of us enthusiastically inviting them to church, they're eventually going to show up, or at least 82% of them will, and oh my goodness, that would be amazing. So what if, you know, the other thing we're worried about, they're going to think we're weird because we go to church, right? Well, if 82% of them are thinking they're likely to go to church with an invitation, they're not going to think you're weird. It's not weird. Now, if you're weird, just saying, they'll think you're weird because you're weird. Stop being weird, all right? There's your message for today. Stop being weird and start inviting people to church. Okay. Little free pastoral advice. And stop pointing to that person next to you. The other thing that we think is, well, I don't want to offend anybody by inviting them to church. Let me ask you this. Were you offended by the person who invited you to church? No. You're grateful for them. You're here. You found your church. You found your people. You love your church. You're grateful you're here. They made a huge impact in your spiritual journey. And that is what you get to do. So you're not going to offend people by inviting them to church. You will if you're weird or if you're pushy. Don't be pushy. Now, as a pastor, you might be comforted to know that I struggle with this. I do. This is, and you throw on top of it like, hey, come hear me preach. I'm great. You know, I mean, that is just a little, or, you know, come to my thing. It's awesome. You know, you just don't want to say, it's like, yeah. And so how do you get through that? And of course, you're not dealing with that, but it's even still just getting the words to say, hey, come and see. And here's what I came to the conclusion of. It's not about me. I'm okay. And it's really not about you. You're okay. You're here. It's about them. They need God. So there's a little bit of, we just need to get over it because there's a whole world of people who need hope and love and forgiveness and direction. And guys, we are the plan. You are the plan to help them get from where they are to there. Every single one of us, not just 2% of us. So I'm going to challenge you today. Here it goes. Ready? I've warned you that I'm going to challenge you. I challenge you. There you go. You've been challenged. To be an inviter. To begin to invite people to church. Because if we can flip this stat from 2% to 98%, guys, this city doesn't stand a chance in a good way. This community, this region, like if 2% are inviting, and we're having the impact that we're having now. Can you imagine if all of us started saying, come and see? Holy cow. Holy cow. It's unbelievable. Not only would we see a move of God in people's lives in our community, so many people being impacted that the very culture of our community would be changed. But the other thing that you're going to see is you're going to see your faith and your relationship with God begin to grow, because whenever people get on mission with God, whenever people are about helping other people find and follow God, when you are willing to step just a little bit outside your comfort zone, God shows up big. The most powerful ministries I've ever seen, the most powerful lives I've ever seen, are where people are willing to just step outside their comfort zone a little bit and go, come and see, come be a part of this. And you will grow spiritually. I promise you. That's a biblical principle. We grow when we step outside of our comfort zone. But God comes alongside in a special way when we get about what he is about, right? All right. So here's what we do, though, right? We talk ourselves out of inviting people to church. We have an opportunity to invite somebody to church, and the opportunity presents itself, and then we start doing all the questions in our head. Well, who's speaking, and what is the sermon topic for this weekend, and what series are we in, and does it apply to what they're dealing with? And by the time we're done going through all of that, we've come to the conclusion that the middle of a series isn't a good time to invite somebody to church, so I have to invite them in 3 weeks, and then 3 weeks comes and the opportunity is lost, and you've moved on, or you've forgotten, or whatever else. And that's what we do, because we overanalyze the situation. So here's what I want to do. I want to give you 3 things to listen for in a conversation. As you're having conversations throughout the week, listen for these 3 things. If one of these things shows up, invite that person to church the following weekend. It's that easy. And there are 3 knots. Ready? The 3 knots are these. They're not in church. They just don't go to church anymore. Invite them to church the following weekend. Things are not going well in their life. They're looking for hope. They're looking for help. Invite them to church the following weekend. Or they're not prepared for what they're dealing with, and they're feeling a bit overwhelmed. Invite them to church the following weekend. So let's break this down a little bit. So if they're not in church, so you're having a conversation with them and you're like, gee, George, I was in church last week. Oh, you go to church? I haven't gone to church for years. Let's pause. Oral clue. All right, so I need to invite George to church. All right, and we invite George to church. Now, here's what I don't want you to do. You're having a conversation with somebody and they're like, I love my church. Do not, under any circumstance, say, well, I know you love your church, but you would love my church better. You need to come to my church this weekend. All right? If they love their church, let them go to their church. Right? They're good. They're good with God. It's all cool. But if they don't go to church, if they've left church, if they're frustrated with church and they're on their way out, invite them to church. And it's really easy. This is what you say. You ready? It's going to make this so easy for you. Really? You should come to church with me this weekend. That's not hard. You can do that. Really, you should come to church with me this weekend. And this way you don't do all the mental gymnastics and try and figure out what's going on and who's speaking and what the series is and all that. It's just like, no, if I hear that they're not in church, I'm going to invite them to church this weekend. You predetermine that, and then when you get in the moment, you even have the words to say. Really, you should come to church with me this weekend. Guys, this is huge. This is powerful. And by the way, if you don't have invite cards for church, pick them up at the Welcome Center on the way out. Keep some in your purse or your wallet and be prepared at all times, because I'm telling you, as you listen, you're going to hear these knots all the time in conversations. All right, so if they're not in church. Also, if things aren't going well, they've lost a job, they lost a spouse, they got a kid who's out of control, they got a kid who's sick, or their house is falling in, or I don't know, whatever else is not going well in their life. If they're like, man, these situations happen to people, and then people who are just, nothing's going well in their life. So if nothing's, really, you should come to church this weekend with me. You should come, yeah. All right. The third one is this. So they're not in church. They're things are not going well. And the third one is they're not prepared for what they're facing. We just got married, and boy, this is harder than we thought. Yes, it is. Really? All right, just saying. Or they just had kids. These things don't come with manuals. Why do you do this? Really? You should. Just moved into a new house. We've never been homeowners before. Just got a new job. I'm completely overwhelmed. Or I got promoted at work and this is tough. Or I'm new to the area and don't know anybody. I'm not prepared for what it is that I'm dealing with right now. Things are overwhelming a little bit. Really? You should come to church with me this weekend. Now let's practice this together. You ready? And you got to get that little squeak in your voice on the really. All right? All right? Really? You should come to church with me this weekend. That wasn't bad. I think we can do better. 1, 2, 3. Really? You should come to church with me this weekend. Let's do it one more time just so we're sure we have it. 1, 2, 3. Really? You should come to church with me this weekend. Give yourselves a round of applause. You don't really have to squeak unless you're in puberty, and then you can, but that's not actually essential. And guys, listen to me. It doesn't matter who's speaking that weekend. It doesn't matter what the sermon topic is. It doesn't matter if we're in the middle of the series. Something that I have learned a long time ago is that God will make the connection. He always does. Like when I get up to preach, I can't tell you how many people will come up to me and go, "Did you follow me around all week?" No, I'm not creepy like that, right? Or how did you know that it was like you were speaking just to me? And every one of our speakers will tell you the same thing because they hear the same thing. And there is something mystical that happens between my mouth and your heart where God takes the words and he makes them just what you need to hear. And he does that. And you know how I know this is true? Because I'll have people come up to me and go, "You know, when you were talking about Jesus walking on the water this morning," and I'm like, and I just smile and nod because I didn't talk about Jesus walking on the water this morning. Like people hear things that I don't say, and it happens all the time, right? But it was just what they needed to hear. And that is the power and the presence of God speaking into people's lives. And so the connection part, God will take care of the connection part. You know, sometimes I'll get up and I'll preach, and just a moment of honesty. There are some sermons that I feel are really good, and there are some sermons that I feel are like, just being honest. You wouldn't believe how many times people come up after the ones that I feel like are and go, "That was the most powerful message I've ever heard." And it just spoke right into their life because God is taking care of the connection part. You don't have to do the mental gymnastics. Just listen for the 3 knots. And if you hear one, just say, "Really? You should come to church with me this weekend." And you will be surprised over time the lives that you get to impact and change. See, come and see evangelism, guys. It's biblical. It's powerful. It's relevant, and you are capable of doing it. And can you imagine if we got over it? Like if we really could get beyond our little bit of fear in this arena, got prepared, and when we had those opportunities, just invite people. If it's only 2% now, and we're having the impact we're having at 2%, can you imagine the impact if you got in the game and the person sitting next to you got in the game and everybody in this room could just learn that phrase, "Really? You need to come to church with me this weekend." And guys, it is going to transform our community. So work on making this automatic. Listen for the 3 knots. And then really, you should come to church with me this weekend. Now, we have for you, I promised you every weekend we would have swag, right? You guys are excited about swag. I can tell. So this weekend we have for you a key tag that will help you in this endeavor. And so the front of the key tag simply says the Vineyard Church and then vineyardwheeling.com. In case you don't know, vineyardwheeling.com is our website, and you can go there to get the latest information on what's going on in the church and where we happen to be meeting that weekend, which will be the Capitol here in a few weeks. All right, but then if you flip it over, this is the actual powerful side of the, are the 3 knots. You're welcome. They're not in church, things are not going well, or they're not prepared. We're going to say this together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Really? You should come to church with me this weekend. Yes. All right. So make sure you get one of those on the way out the door. Put it on your keychain. Look at it. Remember the 3 knots. Don't forget the really part. And let's start doing this, because, guys, I really do believe the church is the hope of the world. I really do believe the gospel of Jesus Christ is what changes hearts and changes lives, and ultimately, as it spreads from person to person, it changes cultures and societies, and I think God is on the verge of doing something big and Wheeling, and it's going to take every one of us playing our part, and this is a part that every one of us can play. So will you join me? Will you join me in becoming an inviter? And we'll work on it together. And if you do, you get to be a part of changing somebody's life. You get to be a part of changing somebody's eternal destination, and maybe their family as well. But remember, 6 or 7 invitations. Don't get discouraged if they don't come the first time. Don't get discouraged if they don't come the 4th time. You're just part of the process. Just keep being faithful, stepping out, and God will meet you in the midst of that. And eventually, after they run into 6 or 7 enthusiastic Vineyard Church people who invite them to come to church, and they hear that same line, really, you should come to church. All right. They're going to end up coming. You just might be invite number 3, and that's okay, and that's good. But if the church is the people of God, living together in the presence of God on a mission from God, changing our world, pushing back the darkness, and changing our community one life at a time, guys, it really is a movement of all of us. And together, guys, we are set up to just reach our community in a way that I don't think we've ever seen in the history of the Ohio Valley. So, 2 things. On your Connect card, if you're not signed up for a volunteer orientation next weekend, sign up and come. Get in the game, serve. And the second thing is this. Start inviting people, because invitation, come and see, it's powerful. And when you get on mission with God, it will grow your faith. It will change your life. And you get to be a part of helping other people simply by saying, really, you should come to church with me this weekend. Let's pray. Lord, thank you that somebody invited us. God, thank you that you changed our lives. God, and thank you that you called us into your kingdom and your family and onto your team. God, that we're not here just to serve ourselves. We are here to shine your light and show your love and help people who are far from you find you and see their lives transformed just the way ours were. And so in your name, Jesus, would you help us to get beyond ourselves? Would you help us to become inviters? Would you give us opportunity after opportunity to say, really, you need to come to church with me this weekend? And God, I just pray that we would see a move of God that will blow us away, that will change the very culture of the Ohio Valley in the days ahead. In Jesus' name, amen.